I stand on the edge of a broken sky. I'm looking down, don't know why. Henrik, you're still here.
I'm here in the metaphysical sense. I'm
This
in a background work to today's episode. I'm currently defecting to North Korea.
Well, I guess we have to go through with this North Korean flick then, since you have made all the trouble of coming back to the laboratory, even though I tried to throw the keys to the river.
Well, I wasn't given much choice.
Have you seen the interview, the 2014
Yeah, you mean the American comedy?
North Korean edition? Yes.
No, I haven't. I refuse to check up on the capitalist lies.
I checked it for a few minutes, but it looks like I'm not going to be a big fan of this film. You know, you can check out like a 1 minute of a certain film sometimes, and you will not be very pleased.
That will most often be the case if the film is coming from the West.
So, am I sensing some communism thoughts here tonight?
Only the enlightened bird views.
Henrik, there's a certain limit for being nice to the countries of the films that we are going through in this podcast. You know.
But there is no limit to the extent I will go in order to save my own skin.
Well, I guess you have to watch your skin there in Rovaniemi in that case. But it just could be that they won't bother.
Most likely they won't bother because of us, because once again we are dealing about North Korea and there only like one person has an internet connection, and he most sure as shit ain't going to spend his time listening to this podcast.
The internet connection allowed only for the rich higher class, probably only in Pyongyang. So,
and even that will be on a shared computer. Yeah, it's been hidden into some dusty old bunker where it's under constant surveillance.
and even then there are some firewalled websites, plenty. Have you seen this film before?
I haven't seen today's film. Like, North Korean cinema altogether is something that's quite hard to come by.
That it is. I think I haven't seen any other North Korean films, at least in full. I have seen some clips and pieces. Of course, there is a vast library of some interesting Godzilla-like copies, like Bulgasari. One of those films directed by the couple that was hijacked, or mainly the man of this couple.
Which, I have to point out, is completely fake news and nothing of the sort ever happened.
It's good that we have our facts straight in this podcast.
Yeah, I had an accurate record here that basically, for example, today's film, the director was Kil-in Kim.
Yeah, and the story goes something like this, that they were kidnapped. First the wife was kidnapped, and then the director himself went to look for his wife in Hong Kong, but was kidnapped as well, and they spent several years inside North Korea, forced to make movies, and finally they got their chance to escape when they were in the Vienna Film Festival, snuck up under the guards' noses, took a taxi and went to the US Embassy. So, of course, a lot of what they have told is relying upon their own testimonies, but they do have this recording that they allegedly did record while in the company of Kim Jong-il.
Which is famously, as known, it is a CIA lies, and the recording is completely manufactured.
Of course.
Nothing of the sort ever happens. But yeah, that is kind of the crazy history behind today's film.
Yeah, because this director is also the uncredited director of this film. I do not know, it was very hard to come by any proper information on this movie, but most likely this was directed solely by him, and the directing mantle or title in the film anyway was given to Kil-in Kim, and the proper director was probably the South Korean Shin.
Like I said, it's hard to actually confirm, and it is something that we unfortunately are forced on to go completely on hunches.
Well, the guy had a career in South Korea and then suddenly went to North Korea to make films. I don't think he was that big of a fan of Kim Jong-il that he would take the leap to go there to make movies and then come back.
No, but to confirm that he actually is the real uncredited director of the film, that is kind of hard. You can't actually get that much proof, like solid fact proof on the matter.
Not for this episode anyway. Probably the truth is out there.
I would hazard to say that the truth is something that you can never actually completely find on this subject, because it depends on who you are asking. If you ask from North Korean officials, obviously nothing of the sort ever happened, and the couple simply defected to North Korea. And Sang-ok-shin would not have taken part in directing this one.
Yeah, well, if you ask from Kim Jong-il, in his honest opinion, Sang-ok-shin came to North Korea by his own will, but take it with huge truckloads of salt.
But the point that I'm aiming at is that even if you are forced to take everything with a grain of salt, actually verifying any statement is pretty hard one, because North Korea kind of has a counter argument against every argument you can propose against them. If you go with the kidnapping narrative, which most likely is what actually did happen, North Korea is the first one to actually denounce every such accusations, and they are quickly to point out that Sang-ok-shin and his then ex-wife were kind of repeatedly allowed to leave North Korea, of course under surveillance, which most likely would be spin that it was on their own protection, but were still allowed to leave it, for example, to take part in cinema festivals whenever they were actually presented rewards for the films they had made. It's those weird cases where there is this unofficial truth that most definitely holds water and is what happens. But if you try to present it, if you try to make an actual accusation, the official side can manufacture enough fake evidence to support their narrative, and overcoming that fake evidence becomes actually quite impossible.
True, but if we listen to Sang-ok-shin, in his own words, he tried to escape twice from North Korea when he was captured and taken to North Korea, and after that he was sent to a prison for 2 years, was re-educated, and once it was deemed that he is re-educated enough, he was given more freedoms and began directing. And after that, when they finally managed to get out of North Korea, he managed to get out of North Korea with his wife. They got to the US Embassy, as said, and did live in the United States for 2 years. Looks like solely for the reason that Sang-ok-shin was really hesitant to go back to South Korea because he didn't believe that the authorities would believe the whole kidnapping story, which is quite incredible, I have to admit. But why not?
Yeah, it is and it isn't. Like, once again, the hostilities between the two Koreas, they are so high, and they're defecting from one side to another, and counterwise, it is such a politically loaded subject that it's kind of easy to believe that both nations regard such talks with a heavy grain of salt and are paranoid to a point in believing basically anything that goes around when it comes to defecting or being kidnapped. And in that sense, South Korean officials, I kind of can agree with Sang-ok-shin's fears that the South Korean officials, they could have also taken the stand that Shin would have simply defected and would not have been kidnapped. So yeah, in order to give some background into the basically the two players of the whole kidnapping narrative, both Shin Sang-ok and Choi In-hee were both kind of a heavyweights in the South Korean cinema back in the 1970s or 1960s, before the 1970s. And this was most likely the time period because of why they actually caught the eye of Kim Jong-il in the first place. And then in the 1970s, the South Korean government started to implement censorship program that also affected the filmmaking in South Korea. And this is kind of the point that brought both Chang-ok's and Choi Eun-hee's careers to the rock bottom, because they couldn't actually completely work with the new censorship. And to my understanding, this was also kind of the time period when Shin and Choe divorced due to Shin being a continuous adulterer and having affairs with 2 or 3 extra women on side of Choi Eun-hee. And this kind of is when the kidnapping finally took place. It was 1978 when Choe went to Hong Kong to meet a mysterious contact who had proposed a directorial kick to Choe. And Choe was drugged and speedboated out of Hong Kong and straight into North Korea. And the main reason behind this was that Choe was being used as bait for Shin Sang-ok, who then, following the trail of breadcrumbs, also traveled to Hong Kong, where also he was later on kidnapped.
Yeah, let's check out some North Korean history really quickly, because most people know kind of the basics. But yeah, the Korean peninsula, Korea, was first like a unified country in the early 1900s. And then there was the Japanese occupation, which lasted from 1910 to 1945, so about 35 years. After which there was, of course, the World War II, which affected the political sides of the Korea, which split the whole country in two. Officially, it was split by the United States, who split it roughly in half. This is a very simplified version. And after this, the North Korea, a couple of years after this, was solidified with the Russians. The North Koreans launched the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. And that's kind of that in a nutshell, that now we have North Korea, the communist side, and South Korea, the, well, capitalist side.
That's kind of extremely in nutshell.
Extremely.
Extremely, and in so much nutshell that it's impossible to say anything about North Korea with that much of a nutshell.
But yeah, North Korea being pretty much the only country of its kind in the present day. North Korea is definitely something else with the person cult going on. No internet access for regular people. Basically all communications to the outside shut, except for high officials and pets of the political system.
North Korea has ended up in this kind of a state where it is, at the similar time, it is both the boogeyman of the entire world and it's also the joke of the entire world. Like whenever anybody talks about North Korea, it's very hard to actually, hold back the sniggering. You are going to immediately hear, because we kind of have this image that the North Korea itself has never actually helped, but this extremely crazy and facing everything with hostility kind of a nation. It's kind of the mad chimp of the world, nation-wise. You could say, when it comes to the attitudes that you often combine with North Korea and how North Korea is being talked about. It's either that, it's either the idiotic nation, or then it's the overtly violent and constantly threatening the rest of the world with a nuclear launch type of nation. These two sides go hand in hand with North Korea. It's the global threat and it's the global joke, both at the same time. And that is what makes kind of touching North Korea such a hard subject. Because there is, I would almost make the case that neither one of those are exactly the 100% truth of what North Korea is, but instead the truth kind of lies there somewhere in the middle.
Fortunately, nowadays, in 2018, for example, there's been a lot of newfound friendliness between South and North Korea. At least that's how it looks on the outside. Of course, there's the fact that North Korea might be in such of a situation at this point that they are running out of options. They have to negotiate themselves some help.
I don't know. I kind of see the age-old gambling move going on once again.
Yeah.
When it comes to the kind of a more lenient attitudes.
But certainly it's been kind of a different level of lenient attitudes lately. At least Kim Jong-un did take the huge step for mankind and did step to the side of South Korea, which was the first time since the Korean War. Friendly things, touches like this.
I wouldn't count too much on that. To me, and once again, this comes from a film podcast side and not from a high-paid political analyst. But to me, it was kind of an empty gesture from Kim's side. Because there is kind of this puppet theater that I feel we have seen when it comes to North Korea and the global theater in that sense. In the sense that it's easy to see why the narrative would play out as it has now, and it's easy to kind of see that this is something that has also played out in the recent history. The way how I approach the situation when it comes to what has now happened in the Korean peninsula and with the attitudes between North and South, I'm seeing a repeated behavioral pattern in one way, in the sense that North Korea likes to play this fast and loose game where it comes out with guns blazing and makes these extremely hostile threats, and it lets the fear and the anxiety to play out on a global scale where everybody starts to once again be afraid of what North Korea would be doing next. And once the anxieties hit the high point, then the North Korea starts to be more lenient. It starts to once again slide back into that more diplomatic role. It starts to make diplomatical openings. Like, for example, with Kim Jong-un, who first declares that North Korea is going to drive once again extremely hardly its nuclear plan.
Yeah, I'm no stranger to the yo-yo game that the North Korea has been playing. I've seen it happen, and it's happened ever since the Korean War, basically. But what I've seen now is kind of something that I haven't not seen or read before. Whether or not it will mean anything, we'll see. But Kim Jong-un for a long time didn't have basically any kind of friendly relationship or contact with China. Now that is happening. There's contact happening with Donald Trump at the moment, which is quite something. There is that stepping into the South Korean side. There is a lot of publicity, interviews of Kim Jong-un. It's the first time, as far as I know, that any of the North Korean leaders have come on to show their face in front of the Western press. So it's something, but what that something will move into, who knows, really. Probably somebody who is not doing a film podcast.
Then again, when it comes to that, and when it comes to, like you called it, the yo-yo game, which I would say is pretty accurate description on how North Korea likes to play its politics, you kind of have to remember that Kim Jong-un still is relatively young leader, at least in the form of the supreme leader of North Korea. And in that sense, Kim Jong-un really hasn't had that much time yet to play the yo-yo game. And what we are now seeing, like you pointed out, what we are now seeing is Kim Jong-un's first lenient approaches towards America and towards South Korea. But at the same time, this is on the timescale of, 8 years that he has been the supreme leader. So there hasn't been that much time yet for him to play the game. And at the same time, if the reports when it comes to capabilities of the Hwan 14 are true, and if it's true that North Korea's ICBM program has finally advanced and they are finally reaching the launch capability to reach as far as Alaska or as far as the United States. And what I've understood about the situation is that they have now the missile capacity to launch a long-range missile attack. Like they have the missile. The problem at this point is that they haven't yet have small enough a nuclear component for that missile so that they can have an active nuke. They have the launch capacity, but they don't have the nuclear bomb to tie into the missile so that they could launch a nuclear missile, and that is the only problem they are now tackling with. So in that sense, at this point, it kind of even makes strategic sense for Kim Jong-un to finally start to take the more lenient approach, because in a way, North Korea would have already achieved what it was achieving all the time. It has achieved the launch capacity, and because of that, it no longer has to play time and try to keep the situation on a manageable level while they are studying their way to reach the launch capability.
How lovely it would be to have a North Korean defector here joining in this podcast. Maybe next time when we have plenty more listeners.
It actually could be more interesting to have actual North Korean to take part on the podcast. Maybe someone on the state side to tell us extremely how badly we are misreading any given film that we are touching upon on this podcast, and how we are simply spreading the capitalist lies.
Even better. But I fear that there would be too much of wanted control for the editing booth, so maybe not. But yeah, let's not do that political podcast anytime soon.
Well, we kind of I would say at this point it's kind of too late to have any hopes that we wouldn't end up in making a political podcast, because these episodes, many often they kind of have that split meaning between a movie podcast and between a political podcast.
Don't think we take any sides, but I think it's great that we give a little bit of background to the countries that the films are coming from. About Kil-Dong. Well, Kil-Dong Jong is a Korean novel. It was written during the Joseon dynasty from 1392 to 1897. So this book is about the illegitimate son of a nobleman and his low-born concubine. So a bit of a background of that is probably in order, at least in China, and seems like also in Korea in the past. It has been so that you have a wife and you might have a lower class concubine, meaning a second wife with lower value apparently. And in the book there is the low-born concubine son who has supreme intelligence and supernatural abilities and steals from the rich and corrupt, often compared to Robin Hood Henrik, which makes sense. There is some historical records that have evidence of a bandit called Kil-Dong from the 1500s. Apparently, though, the character inspiration comes from a Korean bandit and folk hero called Im Kok-chong, who lived in the 16th century. And since the novel was released, it has become a mainstay classic in Korean culture and literature. Today, Kil-Dong is also kind of a placeholder name in Korea, much like Matti Meikäläinen in Finland, or John Doe in the States, or John Smith. First truly Korean main character, one of the most important early Hangul novels. Perhaps the most important classic work of Korea, as far as the cultural achievements go. The book is split in 3 different parts. First part happens in the Hong residence. Second part deals with Kil-Dong becoming the leader of the band of outlaws. And third part is the part that you do not see in the film. It's the start of a new life in the country of Yule, after they have overthrown Yule's king. There is no, according to my knowledge, any official release available for this film, so the way to watch this film is YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. And according to the channel that shared this film there, said that this film was particularly popular in Eastern Europe and Cuba, as it was widely distributed among other socialist countries.
Which is kind of surprising when you actually finally see the film and you start to actually notice how a long time for its running time, the socialist messaging is kind of extremely subtle here.
I don't get this really as a propaganda film. And maybe
It
in that sense
does have the elements if you know how to look for them.
Okay, I guess we get into that in scene by scene.
But once again, you're not actually seeing it as a propaganda film. It very much plays, I would say, it very strongly plays into the director's capabilities here. And kind of goes to show you exactly why Kim Jong-il originally wanted to have the pair, and most notably Shin kidnapped into North Korea.
That they would not make propaganda films.
That they would make more subtle propaganda films.
Why would he want that?
I mean,
You mean because the audiences were getting bored of the extremely obvious propaganda films?
Precisely that, because everybody was getting bored at them, and even Kim Jong-il himself was kind of ashamed of the typical narrative and the typical way how North Korean films were made. It was in 1966 when Kim Jong-il originally starts working as the head motion picture and arts division of propaganda and agitation department. To understand the situation, why the kidnapping happened, you kind of need to have at least some of the background knowledge. And during this time, Kim himself was, like us, he was a fellow cinephile, and he took part in producing some of the North Korean cinema. And this made like animation and dramatic war films and stuff like that. And this made, in part, this could actually explain where that North Korean stereotype about Americans, for example, come from, the big-nosed Yanks, as that was something that was kind of seen in the North Korean animation at the time. But what Kim Jong-il himself was noticing was that the films that North Korea was producing, they were, even on his opinion, they were pretty wooden and kind of a goddamn boring, to a point where he, I guess, accidentally ended up going as far as giving a praise to capitalism, as weird as it sounds. Kim Jong-il has been noted to going on for the record on saying, when I watch our films, they are also dogmatic. Why do our films always have the same ideological stories? Why are there so many crying scenes? Frankly speaking, the reason is that in the South they work hard because they need to make money to feed themselves. It's a result of blood, sweat and tears. But in here people are simply happy and comfortable. No one whips them onwards. And this is this was the driving problem that Kim Jong-il was facing during the time. The communistic system that was at play in North Korea was aiming on giving a fair share to everybody, so that everybody got compensated no matter the amount of work the individual put on, meaning that people often gave the minimum effort on any given task. And this is why Kim Jong-il felt that this was the reason why North Korean cinema was as bad as it was at the time. And the reason behind Shin-Shin's kidnapping was precisely to change this fact, because Kim Jong-il couldn't find any way to actually fix the system itself. He couldn't go against the communistic dogma and the communistic system and start to implement capitalism, so he did I guess the next best logical thing, which was simply to kidnap new blood into the cinematic system of the North Korea.
There is kind of a moderate quality to be seen here under the guidance of Shin. So I wasn't expecting the level of cinematographic quality here, for example. So maybe that had kind of an effect on the overall product.
Something I would say that very much may have had an effect on the overall product was that Shin was guided to make the socialistic messaging more harder to see and more under the surface, so that it wouldn't be so in your face.
Do we have anything on the actors? On my side, not really.
No, not actually. In many cases, it's hard to say who played what role. pointing out individual actor and saying that he was really great on this role is something that we can't do since we don't know who is the actor.
Well, we do know this. The director, Kil-in, has 3 credits that we know of. A film called Center Forward, it's a football movie. Then there is Miles Along the Railway. I guess no one knows what this is or no one has even seen it. And then there is tonight's film. So that's it when it comes to him. And Shin Sang-ok, or Sang-ok Shin, is indeed the uncredited second director of this film. Maybe the only sole director of the film, hard to say. But he also did indeed direct Pulgasari. He did 7 films, and after that he escaped. Actors, we know next to nothing about the actors. The information flow from North Korea isn't exactly too open, but the one with the most acting credits seems to be Yoon Hong Kim, who also acted in Seoul's Protest from 2001, which is a North Korean Titanic type of film. Probably works also as a good propaganda to never attempt to leave the country by boat. Just saying. And then there is also Yong-ho Ri, who played Hong Kil-Dong. His latest acting credit that we know of is Comrade Kim Goes Flying from 2012. And he's acted in 8 or 9 films since the early 80s, at least the ones that we know of. And we also have at least one Japanese actor in this, quite surprisingly. If you're going to talk about propaganda in this film, there is propaganda against Japanese. So there's a Japanese actor, and interesting considering that this is a North Korean film depicting the Japanese as aggressors, but so it is, and the actor is Kenpachiro Satsuma. That's the extent of information in the laboratory.
Kenpachiro Satsuma and the director or suspected director Shin Sang-ok being the most notable figures in this film, and the one that are kind of the easiest one to track. With Satsuma, it would most likely be the Japanese Godzilla films, and with Shin Sang-ok, it would be his directing career, even though even that one wouldn't be that easy of a task, because most of his career was made in South Korea, and then possibly, depending on exactly how many films he did there, also in North Korea, and then there were one directorial job in US and 2 production jobs, that being the 3 Ninjas movies. The first one which he directed and the 2 sequels that he produced.
Henrik, would it be scene by scene?
Oh, I guess it could be scene by scene.
The film starts with kind of a North Korean version of a Paramount logo, or something like this. It's one of those statues out there in Pyongyang, I believe, from which we get to the introductory phase of the film, which seems to have no audio in the first 5 to 10 seconds, and then you hear this kind of a, laughable sound effect of water. So we are going to have some pretty cheap sound editing in this film, which is kind of a hallmark of ninja films. And we established that the ninjas also claim to be magicians. I guess this scene could be the ninja fight from later parts of the film, or it just could be seen as an introductory. But it's pretty well executed. I enjoy it. It takes you into the film pretty well.
I thought it was pretty cringeworthy and stupid, to be completely honest.
Well, we are dealing with an old film, and we're dealing with ninjas and kung fu, so I would expect cringeworthiness all the way through.
Yeah, but Hong Kil-Dong kind of is on its own league, especially during the opening scene, when it comes to basically the tropes of the 80s kung fu movies. The first offense here is, like you point out, it is the terrible sound design, which comes play already in the opening scene, and it is very strongly present in basically every fighting scene throughout this film, where they try to make the action kind of more exciting, more out there, more dangerous with the sound editing. by giving whips and ksh and all the other sound effects into every goddamn hit, no matter exactly how slow or non-hitting those hits appear to be, and it actually comes quite graining as the film goes on, but right here in the opening credits, it's just stupid at this point. It's not yet irritating, but it is stupid. And then there is also the fact that Kil-Dong presents himself as the traveling fluidist, which is kind of the least threatening professions you can possibly have. And the third strike comes from the fact that during the opening credits fight, I feel is being edited extremely poorly, to a point where it doesn't work as an opening credit scene in the soundtrack wise, because there is kind of a good music track playing out during the opening credits, and then it kind of gets chopped down whenever the fighting scene actually kicks in and the sound effects kicks in, and then the fighting once again freezes into a freeze frame of some motion, and the soundtrack song once again keeps playing without interruption. And none of that works.
I'm completely willing to just ignore all those freeze frames and all these stylistic unusual decisions.
I'm not. To me, it irritated the life out of me when I was watching it.
Okay, well, it got definitely a little bit old by the moment when it had been done like 10 times. I was waiting for the film actually to begin, but I can't believe that you're making a problem about the flute. It's kind of makes the character have more character. It's just something that he does to let people know that he is in the vicinity, and I like this aspect. It's whatever, Batman has this light reflected on the city, and this guy has a flute.
It's kind of like a bat signal, if bat signal would be lame and laughable.
Flute I would still roll with.
Nope! Most definitely not.
What would you have
like
then?
Wandering badass bard. You wouldn't think
you have to have that
seriously either.
You have to have kind of a trope like that. You have to insert your trope. What would you have it then, like a grand piano, or what's your idea?
I would remove the musical tropes from the main character of a kung fu film altogether.
Fine. But then we have the birth scene, then we have the father scene, where I'm willing to accept some really interesting editing, because it appears that there are two guys there that are almost dressed the same way, wearing a long pointy hat, and that is black, and the other guy has it black, and they have white shirt on. And the establishing shot does not establish this other guy in the room, and we just have this awkward cut into the other guy with the similar clothing, and it's really confusing. Also, we're getting into some cultural aspects here. For example, the quote, "Are you ready to cut your hair for your father's shoes?" Whatever the hell that means.
I guess they're going to make shoes out of hair. Or then the hair would be used as soles in the shoes. I was kind of puzzled myself with this line and the whole notion of hair.
That's a pretty good theory. Or I was just thinking it's some kind of a ritual that you apparently have. But yeah.
But I guess the most important story was the most important notion to make here is the notion that Kil-Dong has mastered the great learning at the age of 4. To give you that wonder child and the special once again in this film.
Oh dear. Kim Il-sung is losing some ground here. There's another superpowered being. Except this one is completely unaccepted so as urban legend or fantastical story. But then you have a leader who claims to have done exactly such things. Go figure that out. But you have a fruit scene, and there's a quote, "A son of a concubine dare call young master brother." So there is the high-class wife, and then there's the concubine wife, and or not really a wife, probably even Not sure if it was established like that, but it's a concubine. And the noble mother is angry that her daughter addresses the son of the concubine as brother, where we already then established that this wife is going to be a bit of a pest throughout the film, or a villainous character.
Kind of the main villain, as far as this film does have a main villain or main antagonist.
Yeah.
The noble mother she is mostly a background force throughout the film. Most of the obstacles that happened, or most of the enemy parties that appear throughout the film, they are not connected to the mother that strongly. The first party being the thieves are the only one that has a direct connection to the noble mother. But at the same time, the noble mother is the only bad character that gets carried over throughout the film as a bad person, and whose maltreatment of Kil-Dong's mother is a plot point and a point in the narrative that is constantly being returned to.
Lord Hong is talking something about organizing a house for them, for Kil-Dong and his mother. And Lord Hong is informed that the robbers are rampant in Yong province, as the magistrates plunder people and peasants can't farm due to compulsory service. So to investigate, Lord Hong is asked by the king to go where the robbers are to pacify them, as it's put. At least in the subtitles, which are kind of not of the highest quality sometimes.
I would still kind of make the case that to me these appear to be still the official subtitles.
Could be. I have no idea.
I didn't get the reading that, like, at the time, there were moments when the subtitles were kind of such of a high class that it no longer read to me like a fan sub.
Well, there are a lot of very interesting word choices, and you could be kind of screwed in trying to pick up colloquial language in those moments. And I'm not sure if there are even subtitles officially made for this film, but could of course be, I don't know.
Most of there kind of has to be subtitles being made, official subtitles for this film, seeing how the film did circle in other socialist countries, and because of that they would kind of need a subtitling process at least to one uniform language that they could believe it would be understood even in other countries.
I would still believe that it was probably translated directly from Korean to all those regional languages, seeing how English was not really seen as yet quite the big thing what it is now, and moreover there weren't communist English speaking countries. Once again, who knows. So the bandits attack, but Dotard saves the day. Part of this fancy language in the subtitles once again. Grandfather appears to save the day. Kil-Dong wants to be the grandfather's disciple because of all these magical tricks that he's pulling off, stopping the bandits in their places. And there we get to the training of Kil-Dong, who is also able to pull the magical abilities.
Interesting to note in the Dotard scene is the fact that the aspect that really speaks to Kil-Dong here is the fact that the old man can use, I guess, the acupuncture points or the key points in human body to freeze the bandits temporarily in their place. And this is something Kil-Dong wants to learn. Like, this is the absolute power that speaks to him. But yet, during the rest of the film, Kil-Dong actually never pulls this stunt off himself.
No, he does pull other tricks though.
He does pull other tricks, and he does use plenty of high-flying kung fu kicks and punches. But this one trick, freezing your enemy on his place, is something that he does not pull off, even though that was supposed to be the main thing that appealed to him. Also, something that I guess needs to be noted is that the bandits attacking here on the bandit attack scene have been hired by the high-class mother.
Indeed.
And this is kind of the only way how the high class mother, since I made the case that she is the main antagonist and the main bad guy figure in the film, this is the only way how she ties into these proceedings and how she ties into any of the factions that are played as villains in the story.
Followed by hitting a chicken with a stick, and with this laugh that is starting to sound like it's done by the same guy in the voice booth, because it's always this very controlled ha 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 ha. Also when he wets the bed, ha 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 ha, very funny, and gets the flute from his grandfather, the origin of the flute, followed by adult face training. Now the jumps are in great form, he can jump over trees no problem. Kills a deer with one stone throw, and off it goes into the grill. Followed by we see the bandits once again. I was a bit confused that Kil-Dong is being so friendly for these bandits, because they are obviously the bandits, but looks like Kil-Dong with all his superpowers is not able to remember them, but actually gives them a friendly smile first, which was funny. They are getting money from some people for unknown reason, which didn't really open up to me for the rest of their life. But apparently they have some slaves or something that help them out. Kil-Dong comes to visit his uncle that seems to be living next door, and the bandits are kind of being the visitors in the next building for the nephew, who is able to bring on such of an accommodation. There is quite a lot happening in this film, and you have to keep up with this shit.
To kind of make it more obvious, what most likely going on is that, well, and this is something that needs to be pointed out to the listeners who may not yet have seen the film, is that grandfather and the uncle are simply kind of a friendly titles given to the characters, and they are not who they really are. Like it's the uncle is kind of a
friendly term just to use.
It's kind of an alternative term for dude or a friend.
I don't know, because
in the way how it's used in the film, Kil-Dong is not meeting his real uncle. He's simply meeting a man who he is familiar with and who he has friendly ties with. And same with the old master of Kung Fu, who Kil-Dong goes grandfather. The character in question is not Kil-Dong's real grandfather. It's simply a title that Kil-Dong presents to him out of respect.
How did you pull that off?
Well, simply because nothing in the film actually implies in any way that Kil-Dong knows the old man, the grandfather. And same with this character who Kil-Dong calls uncle.
Well, I can go with the uncle. But grandfather, I think, could go both
I really
ways
can't
still.
go with
But,
the uncle
yeah,
because when the film starts, it is being made clear that Kil-Dong he is born in the city, and the mother.
That's what I meant.
It is being implied that the mother has also been living in the city, and when they leave the city originally, they are supposed to go to the unfamiliar territories. They are in the middle of the trip when the bandits attack for the first time. That is when they meet the grandmaster old man who takes them to their hut in somewhere in the mountains, and apparently this quote-unquote uncle lives near the grandmaster's hut. So again, I really can't see how Kil-Dong or his mother would be anyway familiar with the character of the uncle as he's being mentioned.
Yeah, that's the point that I was making. Like you noticed that there was this line where he was talking about Kil-Dong like he's kind of a stranger to him, just some guy who appears at this village every now and then. But grandfather, I could still make the blood tie with, or it could of course be like you said, but it's subtitled as the grandfather, and that's all you kind of know.
Does make the film kind of a more confusing than it needs to be.
Maybe this is kind of a bad way to subtitle it for anyone who is going to watch it in the West, because it could be either just some called as some kind of a grandmaster or whatever instead of grandfather.
It most likely is something that is being lost in the translation, so to speak. I took those terms as titles that Hong Kil-Dong grants to them.
There is some clumsy dialogue here. Uncle and Dong find Yong Hwa. The Prime Minister Rim is in Seoul, and this is the daughter of hers that they find, that the bandits were holding.
Who has been kidnapped for no obvious reason, except to make their introduction in the film and to give Hong Kil-Dong kind of an object for his affection.
There's a lot of scenes like that make really clumsy connections, or they are the way that people are introduced is a bit clumsy, maybe not exactly here, but for example, I couldn't find yet any apparent reason why Hong Kil-Dong goes to the house where Yong Hwa is staying. He just comes there, he does nothing, and then he leaves. He just makes Yong Hwa drop the soup. So that was just kind of a forced romance scene between them, in my opinion. Nothing more, nothing less.
It was, and to me that is kind of a continuing problem with the entire film. I saw the film as such that it's kind of being simply built out of these narrative building blocks, laid on top of each other until you kind of reach the point where the narrative can be set that the narrative is finished. And there really wasn't that tying element that would strongly tie these scenes together and make it so that there is a real reason why this scene plays out and why that scene plays out as it does.
True.
Yep, and that to me that's kind of was pretty much the biggest problem I had when it comes to the antagonist forces of the story.
Let's check out some of those unnatural scenes as we go on. Then there is the No to Temptations plotline, where the grandfather master tells Hong Kil-Dong that no, he cannot have any relations with girls like that. You can't pollute your mind like that, you have to keep your focus on your training. During the scene, the scenery changes throughout the scene, so this is some of this kind of honky cutting or like filming logic in any way. It seems like they are on 3 different rocks during this scene. But anyway, he falls for Yong Hwa, and Kil-Dong sends Yong Hwa back to Seoul to her father, so he could clear his mind, I suppose.
Interesting to note that Hong Kil-Dong's training, if you go by what you see in the film and how the film, I don't know if the film is trying to present this the other way, that there is even longer times to still take before Hong Kil-Dong is deemed ready by the Grandmaster, but the way how the film plays out, the way how you kind of see it when you watch it, it does appear that Hong Kil-Dong's training is almost over at this point. Like it's weeks or months until Hong Kil-Dong is deemed ready.
Indeed, and then he is ready and leaves the grandfather with tears in his eyes. But back in Seoul we go. Prime Minister talks to the father of Hong Kil-Dong, wants Kil-Dong to marry his daughter. At this point, of course, he doesn't yet know that he is the son of a concubine, which is a huge deal. Hong Kil-Dong plays his flute, gets his sword, leaves with mother. Already immediately after they turn their backs to grandfather, they do make the line where they say that they are not willing to return home. And the brother from the noble wife sees Hong Kil-Dong now, after years of being away from him. Somehow Hong Kil-Dong was not in touch with his family at all during the training period, for no apparent reason.
Well, it's once again, it's those kung fu trainings where it's necessary that you are completely cut off from the rest of the world as long as your training is going on.
So completely that the whole family will think that you're dead?
Precisely.
Precisely.
It's important that you are isolated when you are trained in the arts of Kung Fu.
We establish more evil upper-class lady. She is clearly not happy that Kil-Dong is still walking in the streets and that the mom is alive. And did she operate the bandit attack? Yes, is the answer. Back at Yon Hwa's flat, that here's Kil-Dong is the son of a concubine. And now it reverses. They want to stop the marriage. Evil upper-class lady then notices that the father is coming back home. He falls asleep immediately. Evil lady not very happy about that. So she gets even more jealous of the concubine lady and plans her evil plot. Followed by yet another kind of interesting scene where the son and the father have a heart-to-heart. Kil-Dong says he wishes his father had not been from lower class. And basically kind of denounces the whole idea that he's been born as a bad idea. Wow. Now I'm not sure, is it the servant lady that is talking with the noble wife when they are plotting against Hong Kil-Dong and are planning to murder him? I guess it is.
It is some kind of a first maid.
Yeah.
Like the most trusted servant lady that the noble wife has.
Yeah, the maid that skips the laundry work, because the one used for all those household regimens is now the concubine. And I'm not sure how she convinced her to do that, but I suppose it's just that I'm higher class than you, so you do this cleaning because I told you to do so.
And that's how it plays out, precisely. The noble wife pulls off rank and forces the lower class mistress, the concubine, to basically do what she wishes.
Regardless of the fact that when they were leaving the grandfather, they already decided with Hong Kil-Dong that they will not return into this flat. Apparently they did. So the bandit tries to kill Kil-Dong again, and this is organized by the mother, and the son of the said mother then appears into the scene, alerting his half-brother Hong Kil-Dong that he should wake up and proceed in handling this horrible bandit.
And this is interesting scene in the sense that this is, like mentioned, there are three antagonist forces or three enemy factions that Hong Kil-Dong must face. The first one were the bandits, who make a return in this scene, or the leader of the bandits make the return.
Yeah.
The second one is the corrupt upper class of Korea, and the last one are the ninjas. And like mentioned, only the first one of these three factions, the bandits, have anything to do with the main antagonist, the noble mother. And this scene here finally sees the end of that affiliation. After this point in the film, the noble mother no longer makes any contact with any of the forces at play. And the only way how she still is an antagonist and is a villain in the story is by mistreating Hong Kil-Dong's mother.
Exactly, this whole ninja plotline is completely loose from everything else as far as I can see it, and it started to really drag my patience in the last 30 minutes.
It does, and even the plot of the corrupt nobleman, it's kind of tied into the plot, but it's very loose footing.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is the problem I have when it comes to the villains in the story arc, and why I earlier made the notion that I felt that this film was narrative-wise, this movie is kind of taking an element block of a plot and taking another block and then putting them on top of each other and trying to build the plot this way, instead of kind of having a continuous and strong running narrative.
Yeah, this ninja plotline is even exacerbated by the fact that you will notice that the audio editing is going straight into hell in that moment. because you can actually hear the original dialogue while the film was being filmed behind the actual ADR, terrible ADR on top of it. I have no idea what was going on. This is incredibly bad.
My first guess, and this is me going off with a hunch, is that they did it that way because they wanted to highlight that the ninjas come from a certain country. Like, the voice work or the ADR behind the actual line delivery is supposed to be the original language, which then is being translated into Korean for the audience.
Yeah, that's a good hunch, though. Let's see if we can notice which language this is.
That's kind of the only explanation that I came up when I noticed that one. Because I was asking the same question. Why is there two audio tracks running on top of each other whenever the ninjas are at play? That was the only reasoning I could find for doing that.
It took me actually like a couple of seconds to even notice that, because at that time I was already kind of tired with the film. So I was starting to float out of this realm, but it's there. And so now basically there are some bandits that take the mom of Kil-Dong as hostage. And there are some bandit fights during daylight, saves a family or two. And this is where Kil-Dong is getting an incentive and notices how things are going in the town. Bandits doing all their banditry everywhere. And now he gets to hear that the governor is exploiting the peasants. So Kil-Dong to the rescue. One of the main bandits there then pleads guilty and says he will turn a new leaf. And he actually does. Turns completely 180 degrees right there and starts to be on the side of Kil-Dong in the battles. Followed by corrupt officials flat at night. The son of a corrupt official plays the flute and scares the living daylights out of them. Followed by the actual flute master appearing at the scene and removing further years from the officials' lives. And this is the most Robin Hoodian stuff that is going to happen in this film. Now the parents try to convince daughter to marry someone else, totally not really working. Here the mother now puts the stepmother to clean the house. This so-called noble wife is getting totally out of hand. And there is talk about not being able to enter the royal court without the money box that has been now lost. Is it the Governor Rim who lost it?
I guess it was the king once again.
The king once again. Okay.
Because such of a big deal is being made out of the stolen money box. And if this sounds like this is that our depiction of what happens in the film is disjointed and jumps around all over the place and does not really make that much of a cohesive narrative, that is purely because that is how it actually happens in the film also.
Yes.
The plot points are really this disjointed from each other. It does play out like there is an enemy faction A and something happens and all of a sudden enemy faction B appears and then that comes into a running halt and then finally the final enemy faction appears and you deal with that and end credits.
It was so disjointed that I actually first, when I saw one of the ninjas pop up from the top of that hut where the lady was trying to feed the bandits or ex-bandits, I thought that was Kil-Dong. But lo and behold, this ninja plotline is completely separate from everything else.
It is. And it kind of makes no fucking sense at all. Like, even when you finally reach the end of the film and you see the final payoff of all of this, it still does raise a question, why was the ninja plotline inserted into the movie? Because you could have reached that end point, the conclusion of the narrative, with either one of the previous plotlines that you have introduced in the film.
Because you have to have your Japanese baddies in the film, I suppose.
That kind of was the only rational explanation I also found for the insertion of the ninjas. Simply the fact that, like pointed out, at this point, it kind of appears to admit, yeah, the ninjas really do come from Japan. They are the most evil faction of the film. They are the faction that unifies the entire Korea against them, and they come from Japan.
Then why the hell not make the bandits the Japanese as well? Or just instead of those ninjas?
Yeah, or why not introduce the ninjas as the first and only antagonist force?
You could have just had one of these bandits to turn to the side of Kil-Dong, and then this bandit would attack his old bandit mates, and that's the story.
It could have worked, yep. Or it could have simply been the corrupt officials throughout the film, and the conclusion of the narrative would have, be achieved through removing the corrupt officials at the very end of the film.
Right.
Like it plays out in the Robin Hood storyline, where it's the corrupt vice king of the land that is the main bad guy, and Robin Hood has to overthrow him.
Right, so now it's Robin Hood against the corrupt Korean officials, and it's Robin Hood against the terrible Japanese intruders, and it's Robin Hood against Korean bandits, and it's all over the place.
It is. Also because each one of these plot lines, the thieves, the officials, and the ninjas, in the end, they don't come into a satisfying conclusion in that sense that conclusion would be achieved through a logical and typical narrative. It's kind of like there is a situation and then it crashes to a wall, and that is the end point. Like all of a sudden they reach the moment where they resolve the conflict.
They sort of do, and they kind of give a different kind of ending than you would perhaps first assume would be happening, that the king would then be more accepting and then let this one wish go through, that Kil-Dong wants to marry Yong. But no. So the brother of Kil-Dong has been hurt in action against the ninjas, and he gives the plot point that they broke into the palace also and stole national treasures. And the bad guys are called the Black Corps.
This is also an interesting point when you compare each of these factions to each other, but the ninjas also go throughout the land and they steal the young girls.
Yeah, they are addicted to those girls and ready to ruin their whole existence because of girls. There is an interesting castle scenery at 5605. Kil-Dong goes through a passage that looks like a castle, and now I'm curious where this was filmed. This is a really nice scenery. As mentioned, you can hear the original dialogue in the background. Now let's see what language this is. Give me some ninjas now. Where are you? Your theory holds. Indeed, they are speaking Japanese there, originally. Yeah, so I guess that's the reason. But it's still a little bit uncomfortable.
The whole ninja plotline is kind of a disheartening to see.
They are also able to do some magic tricks, and the shittiest of them all is the hiding into the sand and getting killed. But kind of as a good notion for this film is the fact that our hero is actually vulnerable, not doing only the Superman stuff, but also gets hurt in the end battle.
Well, he does get hurt when fighting against not the main bad guy, but would the leader of the ninjas be like the second main bad guy?
Yeah, let's say so. So the king says, no, you're not gonna marry my daughter because you're a concubine, because I am too headstrong to allow you to marry her. Everything else is on the table. You can even take all my money, but no, you will not marry my daughter. So the final quote to close the film is, they sailed out to find a land where all can enjoy equal rights and live harmoniously free from poverty. But could there ever be such an ideal land waiting for them? Well, if you wanna be snarky, maybe they landed in South Korea.
Maybe they came to Finland.
Land of the free, home of the taxes. And Kil-Dong did take Yong with him, and they ran away, happily together to some magical land. And that's the film.
Also took his mother. Which I guess also is kind of an important plot point here, since the mistreatment of Hong Kil-dong's mother was kind of a running conflict in the film.
It's kind of a Noah's Ark without the animals. Getting into some new land to establish a new existence. That is Hong Kil-dong, Henrik.
That it is. Like I said, the socialist messaging and the socialist themes, the more propagandistic elements of the story, they do come into play on the second half of the film. The first film is surprisingly... These elements are surprisingly absent from the film on the first half. And the second half is where they kick in with the ninjas and with this mentioning of Hong Kil-dong sailing to a new country where everybody is free, and with the corrupt officials and this class divide.
For me, I wasn't sure what to expect here coming into this film. I wasn't completely excited, to be honest, but at least now I have seen a North Korean film, and probably the films of Shin are some of the best to come out of North Korea. Or is that actually from South Korea? Because you hijack or you kidnap a South Korean director.
Which needs to be pointed out, once again, is fake news, and they defected. And then they stole a bunch of money from North Korea and escaped, as the official version goes.
Of course. The director just wanted so bad to come back to his homeland since he was born in North Korea before the war. The quick categories are waiting for us. Unless we're going to talk about those Hong Kil-dong video games, which do not exist, I hope. Actually, there are Hong Kil-dong video games, but not based on this film. There is a lot of art that has been released regarding Hong Kil-dong. There's books, there's comics, there is animated films, there's a TV series from South Korea that I believe was quite successful. And of course we have tonight's film and favorite performance.
From my end, it goes to the old man. I did find all the acting and all the performances in the film quite wooden. Even when they were trying to present these heavy, hard-hitting emotions, like at the end when Hong Kil-dong's stepbrother is yelling after him as Hong Kil-dong sails away to this mystical land. Even in that kind of a moments, I found that the acting was pretty stiff, in my opinion, and I thought that the old man, the grandmaster kung fu master artist, was kind of the most easygoing in his performance. And because of that, I was most at ease when he was on screen.
For me, it's kind of hard to say when North Korean or Korean actors are wooden or not, because there's also the cultural aspect that you have to see here, and I'm not sure what is wooden and what is just being Korean. So I kind of like the main actor of the film, Hong Kil-dong actor. He was kind of being as wooden as these martial arts film stars usually go, but kind of a handsome-ish lead and pulled it pretty well. I guess nothing special to note there. But grandfather, very enjoyable, especially that laugh. Favorite scene?
Would be the beach fight against the ninjas.
I'll go with the training scenes with the grandfather.
I had kind of seen those training scenes in millions of other kung fu films before.
Of course, I'm just saying that these are some of the more light-hearted stuff in the film. Favorite quote?
From my end, it would be from the end narration. They resisted the regime of the noble and made great service for their country, but all they got were maltreatment and contempt. And that is the most accurate depiction of the life of Finnish student I've ever heard.
Well, magic was explained in the film. Quote, magic is the complex of intelligence, physical and mental strength. End quote. So, okay, good to know. Favorite kill?
Well, all the kills in the film are pretty lame, but if you would have to pick, it would either be... both picks would be from the final battle at the beach, when the villagers are facing off the ninjas. So it's either when the ninjas are being killed by with the throwing knives. Since basically all the projectile weapon kills in the film were somewhat hilarious, since it was jump cuts to the fast-moving hands and then somebody falls over, or it would be that moment when the ninjas are trying to hide in the sand and they kill them with the spikes or the spears, and you see this blood just gouging off from inside the earth.
I was to mention that the first kill when the ninjas are under the sand, and you can see that when he puts the spear into the guy, or alleged guy, you can see the plastic pipe or whatnot when the blood starts bursting out of it. That's my favorite kill.
Come on, don't spoil it. It's the most violent moment of the film.
I'm so sorry that I ruined the film for everyone. Random confusing question. Let's go to North Korea, Henrik. What do you think? There are some arranged trips there, so we could be seeing Pyongyang at least.
I have actually been somewhat tempted on taking a trip to North Korea simply to see all the craziness myself. The problem I'm kind of facing is I'm not entirely sure. If taking that trip, would I kind of immediately find myself in the watch list of the Finnish Central Police Force upon return back to Finland?
I most likely will not still go to North Korea because that would be supporting this evil regime. Then again, you can extend that thought and you can perhaps plan your vacation trip somewhere else than to the close eye of Erdogan in Turkey, so maybe you should just stay in Finland. But North Korea is pretty much something else.
It kind of would be the most adventure you can easily get by simply booking up a trip into any given nation.
But Henrik, did the film match with your expectations?
It kinda did not. I was expecting something much more heavy-handed and more obviously pro-socialist, more obviously pro-North Korean propaganda. I was surprised exactly how little propaganda in the end there was in the film, even though there most definitely was that, and even though it was very, very much in your face. But it was still in a lesser degree than I originally expected.
Yes, kind of same sentiments here. I thought it would be much worse in the overall execution of it. I was expecting more propaganda perhaps, and I was expecting less jokes or humor.
Then again, once again, with that notion, I guess I was also expecting a bit better film.
I think this is the best that you can get out of North Korea. We might have to check on that in some future episodes.
I don't know.
Of course, you can get the great laughs out of something like the what was it, Bulbasari?
Bulgasari. Yeah.
Bulgasari.
I would almost. I haven't seen the entire film. I also haven't seen Salt on its entirety. I'm not sure. Is it the best, most well-regarded film coming from North Korea? But it was awarded in the 14th Moscow Film Festival for Best Actress. So I still want to believe that you can get a better film from North Korea, and I want to believe that both Bulgasari and Salt would be better films.
Nevertheless, this is one of the most recognized films coming out of North Korea. But first image that comes to mind of this film?
To me, it's Kil-Dong as an adult jumping over the tree when he finally gets those iron brands off his legs.
For me, it's when Kil-Dong and mother leave grandfather behind and Kil-Dong has a tear in his eyes. What took you out?
Well, the first thing was the opening credits, which I really didn't care for.
Pretty much the last 30 minutes with the ninjas was dragging on my patience with the weird ADR.
What, the casual racism didn't save it for you?
Nope.
Come on, the film was packing a hell of a lot on you hating the chaps.
I guess that works only in and around northern part of Korean peninsula.
Yeah, when it comes to kind of looking at why the ninjas are introduced, why the film makes a point of making the Japanese as the most horrendous bad guys in the film. My first guess also would be that it would be harkening back into the days of the Japanese occupation in Korea and the hostile attitudes that Koreans still kind of hold over the Japanese for those times, because the Japanese regime in Korea, as far as I've understood, it was extremely brutal.
Yeah.
And that would still be, and to me, it even kind of explains the North Korean mentality that exists in the country today. Because I see a lot of parallels between the North Koreans and the mentality they have. This worship of quasi-godlike leader figure. And also the brutality and the totalitarian attitude they have, this fascist nationality, this belief that they are the best people and the most purest race on planet Earth. And I see that a lot of parallels between that and the 1910s Japan.
Whichever the case, it doesn't take away from the fact that in general North Korea is an extremely racist country in its official rhetoric.
Well, yeah, they are, and once again, it's kind of that's an attitude that I kind of also tie into the history, because when Japan colonized Korea, they wanted to imprint on the Korean people this image that the Koreans were a subset of Japanese race, and this was done in order to kind of lead the Koreans into joining the imperial cause of Japan and to make the Koreans more lenient towards the imperial cause. And to me, this is kind of something that to me explains a lot of North Korean racism and other these nationalistic aspects of Korea.
Sure.
To me, North Korea reads as this kind of a weird hybrid state between the old world Imperial Japan and the Soviet Union mentality.
You are very right about that weird hybrid, but what pulled you in?
What pulled me in? I guess some of the action was good.
Yeah, I think also that the choreography wasn't too bad.
At times.
I mean,
I thought it was absolute dog shit.
If you look at the opponents, I don't think they are always that obviously waiting for the hit to come. As in many such films like this, you can see that they are just... If you switch your focus from the main protagonist away to the antagonist's side, then you can see that there are some really goofy moves going on. But it's also here, but not as strong as you'd think. What pulled me in was certain relationships with the characters. Once again, I would rewind back to the good old grandfather. I had a good time there. Scissors of Sacrilege, what would you do to this film?
I guess I would try to rewrite the entire thing.
Yeah. It's a good point that we have raised during the episode. There should be more clearly defined one antagonist side instead of three different separate parts doing their thing. So that, and the movie spends a hell of a lot of time on some certain frames, and I don't know why. It should keep moving a little bit faster.
I also kind of, now that you reminded me of the three antagonists in the narrative, I also felt that the narrative itself, like the main narrative point of the story, that being the class divide, the noble mother mistreating Kil-Dong's mother, and the fact that Kil-Dong can't marry the woman he wants because of the glass ceiling, because of the glass divide. I kind of felt that it was weak. Like that structure would have needed something stronger into it.
But I suppose this was a legitimate point to raise at the time.
It may have been, but it still is kind of a weak narrative when you look at it. If narratively on this regard, if the only thing you have is that I'm being shit to your mom, and no, you can't marry the girl you want because of glass. It's kind of like you can simplify it into a one sentence, and this movie lasts for 1 hour and 44 minutes.
Yeah, it's too long. It's about 20 minutes too long or so. Yeah, I would do something about the whole ninja plot. Try to streamline this thing. You don't really need to make it so complicated when you're doing a kung fu movie.
Maybe take the ninjas into the story as the first antagonist and simply keeping them, like introducing the ninjas in the beginning as the film does in the opening credits for Pete's sake, and then just have the entire film as the ninjas being the bad guys.
Ditto. You really know you're watching Kil-Dong when
the perverted chaps are stealing young women again. Like what have we been selling to you, Japan?
You really know you're watching Kil-Dong when I don't know. We've seen this millions of times already, but with better execution.
Yeah, that also. I mean, this is almost like a film that is being directed by a guy who has been kidnapped and forced to direct a film.
If I were to be a parrot for myself, I would say that it's once again, you really know you're watching this film when you see this confusing mix of different kind of antagonist plot lines. 3 adjectives to describe Kil-Dong.
From my end, it would be traditional, this meaning the execution of the film, and then traditional, now in the messaging of the film, and finally kind of held back.
Well, it is confusing, it is haphazard, and its execution, and kind of what rises is this, I guess traditional is the best word for it. This that is definitely touching on some history. This old values are at the forefront for like an eternity. Concubine and the noble wife. So traditional.
Traditional is pretty good adjective when describing Kil-Dong.
Did you look at your watch during this film?
I did couple of times.
Same here. It's pretty obvious of the whole execution of this episode. Henrik, would you recommend Kil-Dong?
I like believe me, I would like to recommend Kil-Dong. I really would. I hope I would be able to recommend it, because I think that also North Korean cinema can be very interesting, and there is merit to seeing and watching North Korean films as they are a representative of that culture, and since it is kind of the most guarded culture, it's kind of a closed kingdom. So in that sense, seeing a film coming from North Korea could have an extra meaning in the process of seeing it that makes any sense.
Yeah, there is 2 ways to look at it. Of course, it is interesting in the sense that it's a North Korean film and it gives you this perspective of this extremely closed-up country. But just if we are in that sense, it is interesting. But as a film, most definitely I would not recommend Kil-Dong because of the poor execution, some bad performances as well, but it's just not going as linear as you should be seeing it going. It's just, I don't know what happened here. It's pretty easy to make a good film out of this, but it's going into all these subplot or several directions at the end. So I would not recommend Kil-Dong.
And the execution is what actually breaks it down for me too. And I'm not even making the argument that you have to make easily followable, streamlined, narratively structured movie. Like, you can distance yourself from the typical 3-act structure, and your narrative, you can make a film which has hard to follow narrative. And you can even make your weird art house film if you want. But with Kil-Dong's case is that Kil-Dong obviously does not try to be that kind of a film. It tries to be very linear and very easy to follow film, but the execution is like you said, it's so haphazard that it fails in being that. And on top of that, in many ways, Kil-Dong, it's kind of the Dead Poets Society situation, where if you have watched kung fu films, you most likely you have, at least in some capacity, you have seen Kil-Dong, you have seen all these building blocks. What you may not have seen that often is the socialistic class divide narrative, and maybe not have seen the Japanese people as being the most evil people in the world, like they are in Kil-Dong. But other than that, you kind of have seen this film. You have seen the poor kid who finds his sensei and gets trained into being the god master of kung fu, and then using his powers to defend the people. And you've even seen most of the stunts that Kil-Dong pulls off. You have seen the smoke bombs, you have seen the jumping over trees, you have seen jumping from one tree to the next. You have seen all these, and because of that you have seen Kil-Dong. And unlike with Dead Poets Society, Kil-Dong is not a good enough film to be watched if you have seen this type of movie already. And because of that, it's very hard to actually, in the end, find yourself recommending watching Kil-Dong. I can recommend checking out North Korean movies, but I still want... I would kind of, from what I've understood, I would recommend checking Bulgasari or Salt.
Bulgasari, well, it is probably entertaining because of how terrible it is technically.
Yeah, and the socialist propaganda aspect, or the socialist metaphor, I guess it's more smart in Bulgasari. So also, if you want to have your North Korean propaganda fix, I guess Bulgasari would do a better job.
Yeah, I was trying to look for a film that doesn't have all these usual North Korean connotations, that it's loaded with propaganda, or that it is just ridiculous by the merit of its terrible effects, or that it's simply being entertaining by being so bad. But you can find your fix for that kind of North Korean cinema as well. Maybe next time. That said, this film has kind of made me interested in the South Korean Kil-Dong the Hero TV series from 2008, which is kind of the Kil-Dong story, but with some modern ideas mixed into it. Could be fun. Seems to have good reviews. Well, Henrik, how do you feel? We are still going strong with weird films.
You can speak on your own end. I'm already getting uncomfortable enough to actually start booking flights to North Korea and escape Finland. I think I'm running out of the free soil where I can run.
We'll just have to see if Henrik will pop up here next week, or has Kim Jong-un already sent his boats to, I don't know, or in this case, planes to catch you from Rovaniemi.
Well, I guess at this point, all that will be sent is just an intercontinental ballistic missile. So, if Finland ever gets nuked out of face of the earth, you kind of can... This can be taken as a historical accord. What most likely was the cause?
Yeah, the Flick Lab host
Yep.
was captured and started the World War.
Most likely out of revenge for freezing his social benefits.
Henrik, I think that's pretty much a good wrap-up of North Korean cinema for this evening. Would it be time to sail out of this laboratory and go into the land of pizza and popcorn for the night?
Most definitely not. I wouldn't touch that polluting capitalistic fluff. If we are sailing to somewhere, I absolutely demand that we sail into a mysterious country where there is no class divide and everybody can be free and equal.
Okay, so I guess it's going to be just bulgogi and cold noodles for you.
It will be a wooden shack and re-education for me.
Thanks for joining us, and Henrik, what is our next film?
I have no faintest idea.
Would it be Pippi Longstocking?
I guess it wouldn't. Fuck that.
So next week it's going to be Pippi Longstocking from Sweden, one of our International Cinema Challenge films that most of all my co-host Henrik is extremely looking forward to. So it's about Astrid Lindgren's book, and after the TV series there has been some full films. One of them being...
I guess we are talking about Pippi Longstocking på det Sjöhaven.
Yeah, let's go with that. Well, anyway, it's Pippi Longstocking at the sea, following his father's footsteps as the pirate. Rawr! Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you next week if Henrik has not been completely re-educated. Long live the lab, and see you next week.
Yeah, all praise our glorious supreme leader, Karri. I was not forced to say that on gunpoint.
Is this where it's going to go? Like the flick lab full of kind of a passive-aggressive reminders that, God damn it, Karri, choose some easier movies for this podcast.
These are the secrets that we did not disclose in our celebratory 50th episode. That shit is still going on.
Oh, am I hearing would you like to do a 50th episode part 2 by any chance? We should...
God, no.
Oh.
Anything except that.
Oh.
That is way too much re-education. And the shillings and the missile launches ollaan pikkasen liian vaikeassa aiheessa tällainen nopeaseen keskusteluun.